I didn't wake up to the faint buzz of construction in the distance. What I heard were chainsaws right outside my bedroom window. Still half asleep, I shuffled onto the porch in my pajamas and froze, for men were hacking apart the oak trees my late wife had cherished, the same trees that had sheltered our home for decades. And there she was standing by her white Escalade, barking orders with a smile plastered across her face. Constance Petton, my HOA president. What she didn't realize was that those trees weren't just on my land. She was about to learn the hard way. That reckless mistake would unravel 3 years of hidden fraud, embezzlement, and the biggest real estate scam I'd ever uncovered. So let me ask you, what would you do if your HOA destroyed $50,000 worth of trees just so someone else could have a better view? Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. Because I turned her illegal little chainsaw stunt into a $1.4 million judgment that gave me control of her entire subdivision. 3 years ago, I thought I'd finally found paradise. My name's Garrett Blackwood, 52 years old, recently retired electrical engineer. I had just bought my dream retirement place in Millbrook Estates, Ohio, a corner lot, 1.2 acres, graced with 6 towering oaks that had been there since the 1980s. It had only been 6 months since my wife Sarah passed from cancer. Those trees were everything, my sanctuary, a canopy of green where I could drink coffee each morning and hear her laughter echoing in my memory. She loved trees. Always said they proved that beauty could grow stronger after surviving storms. The house was sold to me by none other than Constance Petton, blonde, 48, using that sharp suburban charm that practically shouted, "I run this neighborhood." She drove a white Escalade with a license plate frame that read "Blessed." She let slip that she was also the HOA president. "Nothing serious," she assured me. "We hardly have any rules here." That was red flag number 1. Red flag number 2 came during my first HOA meeting. She ran it like a corporate shareholder session. PowerPoint slides, buzzwords about property value optimization and community aesthetic standards. I watched her shut down a 70-year-old veteran who wanted to plant a memorial garden for his son. "Not in line with our vision," she declared, gavel pounding like she was a judge. But the biggest warning sign, the way her eyes kept drifting toward my oak trees through the window, calculating. The first friendly visit came 6 weeks later. She showed up at my door in crisp tennis whites worth more than my power bill, clipboard in hand, perfume so strong I could taste it. "Garrett, honey, we need to talk about your trees," she said, her heels ticking against my porch like a clock counting down. She explained that several lakefront residents were concerned about their blocked views. I looked past her to the man-made lake. Across the water stood 3 sprawling homes, each worth close to $800,000, each with pristine sightlines except for my oaks. "The trees were there when I bought the place," I reminded her. "From you, if memory serves." Her smile didn't falter, but her eyes turned cold. "Oh, of course, but things change: property values, community standards. I'm sure we can reach a solution that works for everyone." That was my first lesson in constant speak. Everyone meant her. A solution meant I lose. Over the next 18 months, she escalated like a textbook bully. It began with suggestions during her power walks, little digs about overgrowth or lawn upkeep. Then came formal violation notices. Grass too long, mailbox height, even the color of my welcome mat. Each came with $50 daily fines. Every appeal went before her hand-picked board, nervous retirees who wouldn't even meet my eyes before voting against me. The message was clear: comply or pay. But here's what Constance didn't know about electrical engineers: we solve problems, and we document everything. While she played dictator, I was digging through property law, pulling subdivision records, logging every interaction. Night after night, beneath those threatened trees, laptop balanced on my knees, I wasn't just defending my oaks, I was calculating exactly how much power she really had. Turns out, far less than she believed. The breaking point came when she brought in a so-called arborist to declare my 40-year-old trees dangerous. That's when I caught her first major mistake. The man wasn't certified to make safety assessments. His report was worthless. And as I dug deeper, I uncovered something far bigger than tree fraud, something that would flip the game. She wasn't just targeting me, she'd been running a long con on the whole neighborhood. Her retaliation was swift and theatrical. 2 weeks later, she appeared at my door, a thick manila folder in her arms, that predatory smile I'd come to dread. "Garrett, honey, I have wonderful news, she purred, her perfume making my eyes sting. The newly formed Millbrook Estates Emergency Safety Committee has finished its review of your dangerous trees. Emergency Safety Committee, I'd never even heard of it. Oh yes, she said. Very official. Mrs. Henderson, the Johnsons, and myself. We've determined your trees pose an immediate threat. She shoved the folder at me like it was a court order. Inside were photos of my oaks taken during an ice storm. Branches heavy with ice, framed to look like widowmakers ready to fall. The report demanded immediate removal to prevent catastrophic damage. Her audacity was breathtaking, but she'd overlooked one critical detail. I knew the rules. Emergency assessments required certified arborists. While she smirked, I was already plotting my counterstrike. That night, I pulled up the state licensing database, something I'd learned to navigate years earlier during Sarah's cancer battle, when one of her doctors turned out to have credential issues. Sure enough, her expert arborist had his license suspended 3 months earlier for falsifying reports. A thick state file documented his fraud, and even better, Ohio is a one-party consent state. Every conversation I'd recorded with Constance admitting her real motivation, those lakefront views, was perfectly legal evidence. The next morning, I called City Inspector Rodriguez. When he arrived, weathered and sharp-eyed, I handed him the arborist's violations and played my recordings. He walked the property with a GPS, muttering curses under his breath as he realized what he was seeing, an HOA fraud scheme. Mr. Blackwood, he said finally, looking genuinely angry, these are specimen trees. Perfectly healthy. Someone wasted city resources with false claims. Could you put that in writing? I asked. He was already scribbling. Complaint dismissed with prejudice. And tell your HOA president file another false emergency report, and she could face criminal charges. Now it was my turn. I went. And UCLA I filed complaints with the state licensing board, the city inspector, the county prosecutor. But the real game changer, property lines. The original 1987 subdivision plat revealed something shocking. My corner lot extended 15 feet further toward the lake than current markers showed. Somebody had been shifting boundaries, probably during landscaping projects, giving my neighbor's land that legally belonged to me. I'd seen this before during my father's estate settlement. Original plats always outrank later surveys. Deed descriptions are final. When I presented this to Mrs. Henderson, her face drained of color. Garrett, I need to admit something, she whispered, glancing around. Constance told us you were planning to cut those trees anyway, for insurance money. She said if we didn't sign her petition, our property values would plummet. And then she leaned closer. There's more. She's done this before. Remember the Williams on Elm Street? She forced them to cut down a healthy maple. That blocked someone's lake view. They ended up selling their home instead of fighting her. That night, I sat beneath my embattled oak trees with a yellow legal pad in hand, the quiet rhythm of the lake lapping against what I was beginning to suspect were illegally installed docks. Slowly, the picture was coming together. Constance's actions weren't random tree vendettas. She was orchestrating a calculated scheme to manipulate property values. The real shock came when I decided to dig into the most obvious question. If Constance was so obsessed with boundaries and views, maybe I should take a hard look at where her own mansion sat along the shoreline. 3 days later, the county records I uncovered made my hands tremble with adrenaline. Constance's prized lakefront estate, the one she was so desperate to improve with better sightlines, was on shaky legal ground. Bankruptcy filings from the original developer revealed that her entire lot had been designated as community green space. In other words, Constance Petton might not legally own the land her house occupied. She retaliated like a cornered predator. The morning after I won the property line dispute, I opened my front door to find 5 violation notices rubber-banded to the handle, each one more absurd than the last. My grass was allegedly 0.3 inches above community standards. My mailbox, painted charcoal black, was deemed unauthorized because it wasn't the approved shade of navy. Holiday lights, left up 14 days past the deadline. My welcome mat, earth tone instead of regulation beige. Even my garden hose got cited for being visible instead of hidden away. Each so-called violation carried a $50 daily fine. That was $250 a day draining from my account until I complied. The notice warned I had 30 days before they would slap a lien on my property. Standing on my porch with those papers in hand, The scent of honeysuckle drifted from Sarah's memorial garden, its sweetness tangled with my rising fury. Constance wasn't just harassing me, she was trying to financially strangle me into submission. But in her arrogance, she'd made a fatal mistake. She'd put everything in writing. That afternoon, I marched into the county courthouse and requested every corporate filing for the Millbrook Estates HOA. The clerk, a weary woman with ink-stained hands, slid me a folder far too thin for an organization supposedly backed by years of annual reports. Inside, I found a revelation that made my heart pound. The HOA's nonprofit status in Ohio had lapsed 18 months earlier. They'd missed their renewal and never bothered to refile. By law, something I knew from an old consulting contract, an expired corporation loses all power to collect dues, levy fines, or enforce any contracts. For over a year, Constance had been running an illegal extortion racket. And then it got worse. The HOA's bank account wasn't even registered to the association. Every single dues check for the past 2 years had been funneled into Pettin Properties LLC, Constance's personal real estate firm, nearly $250,000 in community funds, siphoned into her business. I had stumbled onto outright embezzlement. The Ohio Attorney General's fraud hotline answered on the second ring. The investigator on the other end practically drooled when I laid out the expired status and the diverted funds. "Mr. Blackwood, you're alleging theft of more than $200,000 in dues." "That's just the beginning," I told him, flipping through the bank records I'd obtained through a public records request. "She's been using our own money to bankroll fake violation notices and fraudulent expert reports." While assembling my evidence package, I decided to dig into Constance's past. What I found made my hands shake, not with excitement this time, but with anger. She had pulled the exact same con into other neighborhoods. Families bankrupted by manufactured fines, forced to sell their homes at discounted prices. Every sale conveniently handled by Pettin Properties. It wasn't just corruption, it was organized property theft disguised as community management. The proof I needed came straight from Constance's own Facebook feed. She had documented everything herself, boasting about improving property values by clearing unsightly obstacles. Photos showed mature trees being cut down, captions praising enhanced sidelines and community aesthetics. She had essentially confessed to conspiracy in public. I called an emergency meeting with the 3 reasonable board members, the only ones who'd resisted her push to clear-cut the trees. We gathered in Henderson's living room, the smell of fresh coffee unable to mask the tension crackling between us. When I spread out the evidence, expired filings, bank statements, records of forced sales, their faces shifted from shock to disbelief to pure rage. "She's been stealing from us for 2 years, Johnson said, his voice breaking. "Worse," Henderson snapped. "She's been using our own dues to manufacture fake emergencies and bogus violations. Every fine collected was illegal." Henderson walked to the window, staring at Constance's mansion gleaming in the sunlight. "No wonder she insisted on controlling the finances when she became president. We thought she was being generous. She was pocketing our money, too." Nights later, Constance made her final move. She convened another emergency board meeting, this time dragging along her husband, City Councilman Richard Pettin, as backup. The fluorescent lights of the community center buzzed overhead as neighbors filed in, buzzing with anticipation. "Ladies and gentlemen," Constance announced, her voice dripping with false authority, "Mr. Blackwood's defiance threatens our property values. I move for an immediate vote to authorize emergency tree removal and expedited lien enforcement." I rose to my feet, clutching the folder of evidence, and felt every eye in the room lock on me. "Before any vote," I said, my voice steady, "this community deserves to know that our HOA has been operating illegally for 18 months. Every fine, every penalty, every threat, it's all fraud." The room erupted into chaos. But Constance wasn't finished. If anything, she was about to make the move that would destroy her. What happened next still chills me. For 3 long seconds, Constance sat motionless, processing my revelation. Then she smiled, not the plastic president's smile, but something sharper, colder, the smile of someone who had prepared for this exact moment. "Well," she said smoothly, rising to her feet and adjusting her designer blazer, "Mr. Blackwood has clearly done his research. But research won't protect us from safety hazards." She pulled out her phone and made a call right there in front of everyone. "Yes, this is Constance Pettin. We're moving forward with that emergency tree removal we discussed. First thing tomorrow morning. No, the owner will be out of town. My blood turned to ice. She'd been tracking my social media. I'd posted about driving to Cleveland for my daughter Emma's college graduation. She knew I'd be gone for exactly 8 hours. Ladies and gentlemen, she declared, her voice syrupy with faint concern, emergency tree removal begins tomorrow at 7 a.m. Safety overrides any procedural irregularities Mr. Blackwood has raised. The room exploded with shouts, Henderson demanding proof of permits, Johnson railing about expired corporations, but Constance was already striding out, her husband at her side, phone still pressed to her ear as she made more calls. I followed them into the parking lot, where the streetlights glowed sickly yellow against the heavy summer air thick with the smell of rain. Constance, I called after her, my voice sharp with fury. You cannot authorize tree removal on my property. You don't have that authority. She turned toward me, and for the first time, I caught a glimpse of the woman behind the carefully crafted suburban facade. Her eyes were icy, like the surface of a frozen lake. Watch me, she said, climbing into her Escalade. That night, I barely slept. At 5 a.m., I called in sick, skipping Emma's graduation, the first milestone of my kids' lives I'd ever missed, and set up a camera by the bedroom window. At exactly 6:47 a.m., the convoy rolled in, 2 pickups, a wood chipper, and a sheriff's cruiser. The crew looked professional enough, hard hats, safety vests, all of it, but something about the whole operation felt off. I hurried into clothes and bolted outside just as chainsaws roared to life. Stop, those are my trees, this is my property. The foreman, a grizzled man with teeth stained from chewing tobacco, looked genuinely puzzled. Ma'am said this was an emergency removal. Got the paperwork right here. He handed me an official-looking order signed by Constance Petton, Emergency Safety Coordinator, Millbrook Estates. The document had all the trappings of authority, but I recognized it immediately. Expired corporate paperwork, legally worthless. This woman has no authority, I told him. She's not even running a legitimate HOA. That's when Deputy Martinez stepped up, stocky build, restless eyes, and a nervous habit of glancing toward Constance's house as though awaiting her signal. Ma'am, I'm here to oversee a lawful safety operation. The city inspector approved this. What city inspector? I asked. Martinez fumbled with his notes, shifting uneasily. Inspector Rodriguez signed off yesterday, but I'd spoken to Rodriguez 2 weeks earlier. He'd confirmed the trees were healthy and that any emergency removal would be fraudulent. Someone was lying, and I had proof. While I pressed Martinez, the chainsaw screamed back to life. The brutal sound of steel cutting into for decades of oak thundered through the air, mingling with diesel fumes from the chipper and my ragged breaths. In just 27 minutes, 6 towering oaks were gone, trees that had shaded my home since the 80s. Among them, Sarah's tree, the one where I carved our initials, where I proposed, where she confessed her diagnosis, where I scattered some of her ashes. Gone, reduced to sawdust, blowing across a yard that now looked like a battlefield. But then came the mistake that changed everything. In their rush to finish before I could secure an injunction, the crew cut beyond the property line 15 feet inside my confirmed boundary. Trees that were indisputably mine. When I pointed to the survey stakes, Martinez went pale. He realized instantly he had just supervised the illegal destruction of private property. Jesus Christ, he muttered, reaching for his radio. We may have a problem here. The foreman's face was gray. Ma'am said everything this side of the driveway, didn't mention no property lines. I stood amid the wreckage. $89,000 worth of mature oaks turned to mulch. The smell of fresh cut wood clashed with choking diesel fumes and my own seething fury. But through the grief, a single thought cut clear. Constance had committed multiple felonies right in front of witnesses: trespass, fraud, conspiracy, property destruction. She hadn't just tried to take my trees for her view. She had just handed me the evidence to take her down. By 8:30 a.m., the devastation was complete. 6 oaks gone, my yard a war zone, Martinez sweating over how to word his incident report. I was photographing the wreckage when my phone rang. It was Marcus Bennett, my property rights attorney. His voice carried the sharp excitement of a predator. Sending blood. Garrett, you're not going to believe what I dug up in the subdivision records. Are you sitting down? I looked at the sawdust covering everything I owned. After this morning, Marcus, nothing could shock me, but I was wrong. Constance's lakefront property was never supposed to be private. According to the 1987 development plan, her entire lot house, dock, all of it was designated community green space. The words hit me like a punch to the chest. What are you talking about? The original developer, Millbrook Construction, went bankrupt in 1989 before filing the final plats. Constance's deed is based on preliminary plans that were never legally recorded. Legally, that land belongs to the homeowners association. I sank onto the porch steps, dizzy. She's lived there 6 years, how could that be? Marcus didn't hesitate. Gets worse. Bankruptcy records show she knew. She paid the developer's attorney $15,000 to bury the conflicting documents and push through a fraudulent deed transfer. The pieces fell into place like a nightmare puzzle. That's why she clung to HOA control so no one could dig into the original documents. Exactly, Marcus said. And here's the kicker. Her real estate license requires disclosure of any known title issues. She's been selling homes here while illegally squatting on community property. The licensing board will crucify her. I stood slowly, staring at Constance's shining lakefront mansion. Morning sun glared off her windows like a spotlight on stolen land. Marcus, what's it worth? Conservative estimate, $850,000, the lakefront alone. $600,000. My destroyed trees suddenly felt like a minor piece of a much larger game. So, when we sue, Marcus continued, it's not just for tree damages. We're demanding reversion of stolen community land. This just escalated from small claims to federal court. I thought of every neighbor she'd bullied, every family she'd driven off, every modification she'd forced down people's throats. It had never been about protecting values, she was protecting her own fraud. And there's more, Marcus added. She used HOA funds to maintain that illegal property landscaping, dock work, even her private driveway, all paid with community money. This is systematic fraud. The sweet tang of sawdust hung in the air, blending with the lake breeze Constance had been enjoying unlawfully for 6 years. Every sunset she'd savored from her stolen deck, every party thrown on fraudulent ground, every HOA due she'd pocketed. While squatting on public space, it all reeked of lies. What's our move? I asked. We hit her all at once: tree damages, property reversion, criminal referrals, licensing complaints. By the time we're through, she won't just lose the house, she'll lose everything. I looked at the ruined yard again, but now with sharper vision. Sarah's trees were gone, but their loss had set into motion Constance's undoing. She'd gambled her empire on one reckless chainsaw job. Now she was about to learn some baits destroy the player. How long do you think she's known this was coming? I asked, judging by her recent stunts. She's been prepping an escape plan for months, but it's too late. She just piled fresh felonies onto a civil fraud. Nowhere left to run. Within 2 days of the tree massacre, my quiet retirement home had turned into a command center. Marcus arrived Tuesday morning with 2 associates, a forensic accountant, and a mountain of legal documents that could wallpaper my house. Garrett, he said, spreading files across my dining table, we're not just building a case. We're dismantling a 6-year criminal operation. The accountant, Lisa Rodriguez, sharp-eyed and relentless, had torn apart the HOA books over the weekend. Her findings made my head spin. Your neighbor siphoned off $347,000 in community funds, she said, pointing at spreadsheets that could make a prosecutor salivate. Landscaping contracts to her own shell companies, maintenance never performed, and my personal favorite, $23,000 in emergency legal fees paid directly to her divorce lawyer. Marcus then introduced Janet Morrison, an environmental attorney specializing in tree law. Yes, that turned out to be real. After reading Janet's preliminary damage report, I understood why. 6 fully grown white oaks, each with nearly 40 years of growth, had been cut down. Janet showed me photos that made the trees look like museum pieces. Based on standard industry valuations, their replacement cost came to $89,000. And that wasn't the worst of it. She laid out soil analysis results that read more like forensic evidence from an environmental crime scene. Uprooting those roots had destabilized the slope's drainage system. The risks now included erosion, foundation problems for nearby homes, and ecological damage that could take decades to repair. The third attorney specialized in RICO cases, something I thought only applied to mob stories. But according to him, Constance's calculated pattern of fraud actually counted as organized crime under federal racketeering law. Multiple victims, financial fraud exceeding federal limits, and a conspiracy involving public officials. He rattled it all off like a prosecutor's checklist. Your HOA president isn't just a petty tyrant, he said. She's running a property theft racket. While the attorneys pieced together the case, I turned my focus to rallying the community. News of Constance's illegal tree cutting spread across Millbrook estates like wildfire, and my phone never stopped buzzing. Henderson called first. Garrett, I've been digging through HOA records. Constance overbilled us $8,000 for repairs to the community center, repairs that were never even done. Then Johnson called. She forced me to tear down my garden shed, saying it violated the rules. Then she used HOA funds to install the exact same shed at her own house. By Thursday, 7 families had documented nearly identical experiences. The pattern was clear: fabricated violations, escalating fines, threats of liens, and forced compliance that always benefited Constance or her inner circle. The smoking gun came from an unexpected place. Friday evening, Carol Martinez, the deputy's wife, called me, her voice trembling with anger. Mr. Blackwood, my husband came home sick after that tree removal. Constance told him the city had issued an emergency order, but when he checked with his supervisor, there was no record of it. She lied to him. Or she handed him $500 in cash to oversee the job and not ask questions. He thought it was legit overtime until he realized what she'd done. That gave us proof of bribery involving the law enforcement officer. Marcus spent the weekend orchestrating a multi-pronged attack plan. Criminal referrals would be filed simultaneously with the county prosecutor and the state attorney general. Civil suits would be filed in both state and federal courts. Professional complaints would target Constance's real estate license and her husband's city council position. The key is timing, Marcus explained, pointing to a timeline that looked more like a military operation. We file everything at once: criminal, civil, administrative. That way, she has no chance to hide assets or create fake evidence. But the most satisfying part of the plan was what involved the neighborhood itself. Under Ohio law, HOAs can reclaim common property that was illegally privatized if the majority votes in favor. And now we had proof that Constance's lakefront lot was actually community land. Imagine the irony, Marcus said with a grin sharp enough to light the street lamps. She cut your trees to improve her view, and now we're going to use that crime to take away her lake. Then Janet's environmental report revealed a bombshell. The area where my memorial trees had stood was originally designated as a protected wetland buffer in the development plan. Destroying them wasn't just vandalism, it was a federal environmental violation. She thought she was fixing her sightline problem, Janet explained, pointing to EPA regulations that added another $200,000 in potential fines. Instead, she just violated the Clean Water Act. By Sunday night, we had it all. Criminal evidence, civil damages estimated at $1.4 million, and documents exposing the biggest property fraud case in county history. As I sat with a cup of fresh coffee, reviewing the plan one last time, satisfaction settled in. After 3 years of bullying the entire neighborhood, Constance was about to learn what happens when a community fights back with professionals and relentless determination. Her desperation showed the instant our filings hit the court. Monday morning, I watched from my kitchen as a moving truck pulled up to her mansion. By noon, a for sale sign sat on the lawn of the very lakefront property she'd stolen 6 years earlier. She was trying to sell everything before the courts froze her assets, but Marcus was ahead of her. By 2 p.m., we had a restraining order blocking any transfers. The expression on her face when the sheriff handed her those papers made every sleepless night worth it. That evening, she made her first major blunder. Instead of laying low, she launched a social media campaign. I'm being targeted by a vindictive neighbor who refuses to follow community rules, she posted in the HOA Facebook group, attaching cropped photos of my yard to make it look messy. Mr. Blackwood has filed baseless lawsuits just to dodge legitimate fines. The backlash was immediate. Neighbors flooded the thread with their own horror stories. The Hendersons documented $3,000 in fake fines. The Johnsons posted proof they'd been forced to pay twice for the same landscaping, once through dues, and again when Constance claimed the first work was subpar. By Wednesday, 17 families had joined our class action, but her next move crossed into criminal territory. She tried bribing Inspector Rodriguez, offering him $2,000 to backdate a tree removal order. Furious at being dragged into her scheme, Rodriguez wore a wire. The recording was devastating, her voice crisp and unmistakable, as she offered cash for falsified government paperwork. Marcus played it for me over coffee that tasted like victory. I need you to sign this emergency authorization and date it for last Friday. 2,000 cash, and we'll both pretend this paperwork got lost in the shuffle. Rodriguez's reply was perfect. Ma'am, you're asking me to commit a felony. The FBI loved the tape. That single act upgraded her case from state misdemeanors to federal felonies carrying real prison time. Meanwhile, I faced a new battle. Constance had convinced 3 neighbors to sign affidavits claiming my trees were dangerous and that she'd remove them to protect the community. The language was identical, clearly coached. A little digging showed all 3 had recently received tax reductions pushed through by her husband on city council. That gave us evidence of conspiracy and official misconduct. Thursday, Constance tried another desperate tactic, filing a countersuit against me. She claimed I'd harassed her, threatened her family, and waged a campaign of defamation, demanding $500,000 in damages. Her mistake: she included dates and details I could easily disprove with records. Phone logs showed I was in Cleveland on days she said I'd called. Home security cameras proved I hadn't left the house on nights she accused me of vandalism. Marcus chuckled as he read it. She just handed us proof of perjury. That's another felony. The neighborhood rallied hard. Families brought meals, volunteers helped replant my ruined yard, and a defense fund raised $12,000 in 3 days. But the strongest show of support came from Carol Martinez, who organized a petition demanding Constance's removal from the board. Within 48 hours, 41 of 47 families had signed. We're done living under a dictatorship, Carol declared at a hastily called meeting. The fluorescent lights hummed like angry wasps as she read the names of families who had been fined, bullied, and terrorized. Henderson stood, her voice shaking with fury. She stole from us, destroyed our neighbors' property, and turned our community into a battleground. Enough. By Friday, the noose was tightening. Federal investigators froze her accounts. The state suspended her real estate license. Her husband faced ethics charges that would end his career. But Constance wasn't finished. Saturday morning, she called an emergency HOA meeting for Sunday. The agenda promised resolution of disputes and big financial decisions. I knew she was planning something reckless, but I didn't realize she was about to confess everything in front of 50 witnesses on a live stream. That night, sleep eluded me. Something about the meeting screamed trap, but I couldn't pin down how. At 3 a.m., my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. She's planning to dissolve the HOA tomorrow and file for bankruptcy. Thought you should know. A friend. Ice ran through my veins. If she dissolved the HOA, she might dodge liability for fraud and embezzlement. Worse, without an HOA entity, reclaiming stolen property would be a nightmare. I called Marcus immediately. Even half asleep, his voice was sharp. She can't dissolve an HOA on her own. It takes a majority vote and state approval. But if she tries to force it through, it could get messy. And if she succeeds, I asked, then we've got a much bigger fight on our hands. We need to be there tomorrow with our own agenda. Sunday morning, an unexpected ally showed up. Deputy Martinez showed up at my door looking just as worn out as I felt. His uniform was creased, his eyes shadowed like he hadn't slept in days. Mr. Blackwood, he said, his voice unsteady. Before today's meeting, I need to get something off my chest. My wife's been telling me I should have spoken up sooner. He drew in a trembling breath. Constance offered me money to ignore what happened during that tree removal. At the time, I believed it was overtime pay for overseeing a safety operation. You took the money. I asked. No, sir, he admitted, shame clouding his face, but I didn't ask the questions I should have. I let her rope me into enabling what I now know was a crime. He handed me an envelope. This is my written statement for your lawyers. Every word of what she told me, every promise, every way she dressed it up to look legitimate, it's all in there. The meeting was set for 2 o'clock at the community center, but by 1:30 cars were lined up blocks away. News had spread past Millbrook Estates. Reporters had already arrived, cameras standing like sentinels outside. Inside, the air was heavy, charged. Constance sat at the head table in a black suit that looked more fitting for a funeral perhaps. In a sense, it was. Her husband Richard sat beside her, his forehead damp with sweat despite the blasting air conditioning. 3 uneasy board members filled out the panel. But the real shock was in the back row, FBI agent Sarah Bennett, quietly taking notes in a government-issued notebook. Federal agents don't attend HOA meetings unless they're building a case. Constance's gavel struck the table with a faint tremor in her hand. Ladies and gentlemen, recent events have shown that our homeowners association can no longer function. I'm calling for a vote to dissolve Millbrick Estates HOA immediately and divide remaining assets among the homeowners. The room erupted. Henderson leapt up, shouting about stolen money. Johnson demanded an accounting of the missing funds. Constance, ignoring the chaos, pressed ahead with procedure, trying to rush the vote through before objections could take root. That's when her real play clicked for me. She wasn't trying to protect the community, she was trying to erase the evidence. Dissolving the HOA would erase the very entity holding the records of her crimes, making prosecution nearly impossible. I rose with my folder of evidence, every eye locking on me. Before we even considered dissolution, I said, this community deserves to know what exactly is being dissolved. You're out of order, Mr. Blackwood, Constance snapped, her composure finally cracking. Actually, I'm well within order, I countered. As a homeowner in good standing, I'm entitled to present relevant information before any vote of this magnitude. Agent Bennett glanced up from her notes, paying close attention. Neighbors, I continued, our HOA president has stolen $347,000 in community funds, bribed public officials, and unlawfully taken possession of community property worth over $800,000. She's not dissolving this association for your benefit. She's trying to bury evidence of federal crimes. Constance shot to her feet, face flushed. That's slander. I've devoted years to serving this neighborhood. Then explain, I said evenly, why your private lakefront home sits on land that was designated as community green space. The room fell silent. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The only sound was Agent Bennett's pen scratching against paper. That's a misinterpretation of the development plans, Constance stammered. A misinterpretation that's left you $850,000 richer, I replied, at the expense of your neighbors. Her husband Richard suddenly pushed back his chair with a screech that cut the air. This meeting is over. We're leaving. But Constance wasn't finished. Anger overtook her, and she made the mistake I'd been waiting for. You people have no idea what I've done for this neighborhood. She screamed, her mask shattering. I've raised property values, removed troublemakers, and enforced standards that keep this place desirable. If that meant creative financing and strategic property management, then so be it. Agent Bennett froze mid-note, lifting her eyes with the look of someone who'd just heard a confession. The crowd exploded in disbelief as Constance realized what she'd admitted in front of nearly 50 neighbors, 2 reporters, and a federal agent. Her downfall had finally begun. By 2:15 the community center was overflowing. Old rivals sat shoulder to shoulder, united by their fury. Reporters lined the walls with cameras. At the front sat Agent Bennett, her badge glinting under harsh lights. Constance entered through a side door, not like a leader but like a defendant, heading into court, trailed by a sweating lawyer who clearly hadn't reviewed the case. Her aura of command was gone, replaced by the hunted look of someone who knew the walls were closing in. This emergency session, she began, voice cracking, is to address ongoing legal harassment and baseless claims. But the crowd wasn't buying it. 47 homeowners had finally found their voice. Henderson stood first. Before you spin another word, Constance, this community wants answers. Where's our money? The question hung heavy, like smoke after a fire. Her attorney whispered urgently in her ear, but she brushed him off with the same arrogance that had led her here. All HOA funds have been handled appropriately, she declared, her hands trembling as she read from her notes. Any irregularities are simple clerical mistakes that will be corrected. That's when Marcus Bennett rose from the back, his briefcase snapping open like the sound of justice itself. Mrs. Petton, he said coolly, would you like to explain the $347,000 of community funds deposited into your private business accounts? Or perhaps why your house sits on land legally set aside as green space? The temperature in the room seemed to plummet. Constance's expression shifted wildly: confusion, denial, panic. Those are private financial matters, she stammered. They're irrelevant. Nothing about federal wire fraud is irrelevant, Agent Bennett cut in, standing with calm authority. Mrs. Petton, you are not required to say anything further, but be aware anything you do say may be used against you in federal court. The room gasped as one. Phones lifted into the air. Within seconds, a dozen cameras were recording what would soon become the most infamous HOA meeting in Ohio history. But Constance still refused to yield. 6 years of unchecked power had convinced her she was untouchable. This is a setup, she shrieked, jabbing a finger at me. Garrett Blackwood concocted this scandal because he hates community standards. I've protected property values, enforced rules, and maintained this neighborhood's integrity. Johnson stood, his face red with anger. You stole our money to cover up fake tree reports. You forced families out of their homes, Henderson added, her voice trembling. And you've been living on stolen community land for 6 years, Martinez's firm voice carried out, his deputy's authority unmistakable. The accusations started coming faster. Neighbors rose one after another, recounting stories of harassment, financial manipulation, and relentless intimidation. The room swelled with the sound of long silence, Justice finally speaking out. And then, Constance made the mistake that would completely unravel her. You don't understand what true leadership demands, she shouted, her composure shattering like glass dropped on concrete. I've made difficult decisions to safeguard this community's investment. If that meant removing disruptive residents, reorganizing finances, or strategically overseeing property use, then I did what was necessary. The room froze in absolute silence. Agent Bennett's pen moved steadily across her notepad, like she was recording a confession word for word. Are you saying you engaged in financial fraud and property theft? Marcus asked, his legal instincts recognizing the precise moment. A defense collapses beyond repair. Constance's attorney gripped her arm, whispering urgently, but she was far beyond listening. 6 years of unchecked power had convinced her that justifying her actions was the same as proving her leadership. I admit, she said with defiance, to doing whatever had to be done to uphold community standards even when ungrateful. Residents refused to see the bigger picture. The crowd erupted in outrage. But Agent Bennett's voice cut through the chaos with sharp, undeniable authority. Constance Petton, you are under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy to commit property theft, and bribery of a public official. The metallic snap of handcuffs echoed like the final note of a symphony. Cameras flashed as federal agents led Constance away, her expression frozen in shock and disbelief. But for me, it wasn't over. Standing at the very podium she had used to intimidate neighbors for years, I faced a room now filled with hope for the first time in recent memory. Ladies and gentlemen, I said, my voice carrying over the stunned silence. Our community has just reclaimed $850,000 worth of stolen lakefront property, and we're going to build something beautiful together. Applause began softly, then grew into a thunderous roar that could be heard blocks away. Justice had finally arrived in Millbrook Estates. 6 months later, I stood on the deck of what had once been Constance's stolen lakefront mansion, watching my grandchildren play where her illegal dock had scarred the shoreline. A federal judge had awarded me $1.4 million in damages, the largest HOA fraud judgment in Ohio's history. But the real victory was what our community had rebuilt together. The legal outcome came faster than anyone expected. Constance pled guilty to 14 federal charges rather than face a trial that could have sentenced her to 20 years. The plea deal required her to repay the stolen funds in full, surrender the property she had illegally taken, and perform community service teaching ethics courses to real estate professionals. Her husband, Richard, resigned in disgrace from city council, and together they fled to Florida to escape the fallout. But for us, justice was just the beginning. The reclaimed lakefront became the centerpiece of our neighborhood's rebirth. Where Constance's mansion once loomed, we built the Sarah Blackwood Memorial Community Center, named after my late wife, who would have loved to see neighbors finally united in something positive. The center now hosts everything from children's art workshops to senior bridge tournaments, funded entirely by the money recovered from Constance's fraud. Even my destroyed Memorial Grove was reborn into something greater. The community voted to establish the Millbrook Heritage Arboretum, where we planted 40 trees, one for every family in our neighborhood. Each tree bears a plaque with the family's name and a message of growth, resilience, and unity. At the center stands Sarah's memorial oak, its brass plate reading, "In memory of love that grows stronger through seasons of storm." The ripple effects spread far beyond Millbrook. Our case became required reading in law schools studying HOA fraud. The Ohio legislature even passed the Millbrook Act, mandating independent audits and background checks for HOA board members. Inspired by our success, 3 other communities reclaimed illegally seized common areas, recovering more than $2 million in assets. But my proudest victory was personal. The retirement Constance had nearly destroyed was transformed into something meaningful. With part of my settlement, we created the Millbrook Property Rights Education Foundation, offering free legal guidance to homeowners fighting HOA abuse. So far, we've helped 17 families overturn fraudulent violations and recovered more than $300,000 in illegal fees. Last month, we hosted our first annual tree festival, celebrating both our environment and our solidarity. Families spread picnic blankets beneath the shade of our new grove, while kids played on swings built where Constance's Escalade once loomed as a threat. The air smelled of grilled burgers and honeysuckle drifting off the restored lakefront. Henderson, now a democratically elected HOA president, spoke about the power of neighbors standing united against corruption. Johnson, our treasurer, presented the first truly transparent financial reports in years. Even Deputy Martinez, who had testified against Constance at sentencing, joined with his family for the celebration. The highlight came when we awarded a scholarship to Emma Rodriguez, a local high schooler who plans to study property law at Ohio State. Her essay on using legal knowledge to protect community rights earned her $5,000 for college and a summer internship with Marcus Bennett's firm. As the sun set, painting the reclaimed lake in gold and crimson, I thought about Sarah and how proud she would have been of what grew from our tragedy. Her carved initials in that first memorial oak were gone, destroyed by Constance's chainsaws. But her legacy endured in every family gathering on community land, every child swimming in water that now belonged to all, every neighbor finally feeling safe at home. The evening closed with s'mores around a fire pit built on the very spot where Constance once parked her Escalade to intimidate us. Children's laughter echoed across the lake, while parents shared stories of the dark days when one person's greed poisoned an entire neighborhood. Those days were gone forever. We had learned that protecting property rights together protects everyone, that documented truth always defeats manufactured authority, and that communities are far stronger than they know when they choose courage over compliance. Now it's your turn. Share your worst HOA nightmare in the comments. You might be surprised at the legal options available. And don't forget to subscribe if you want more stories of everyday people defeating corrupt systems through smart legal strategies and community strength. Next week, I'll tell you about a homeowner who uncovered an environmental crime hidden beneath a neighbor's perfect lawn and how he turned a noise complaint into a $2.3 million EPA settlement that changed federal regulations. From all of us here at HOA Stories, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed seeing neighbors take back their power and justice served, hit the like button, leave a comment, and subscribe so you won't miss the next chapter in HOA drama.